Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Hope you enjoyed the video today. Please subscribe to the channel. Any comments, thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about tuning up your chainsaw. Now this is an old chainsaw in front of you. It's an MS 380, so it's what would be considered a pro saw in its day, made out of mainly all aluminium magnesium and heavy duty clutch bearings, the lot. So I'm going to talk about tuning up this type of chainsaw. It doesn't have any little black restrictors in there. Unlike there's an MS 180 over there, it's got the little black restrictors in there, so you can't tune it up as much. And like on some of the modern chainsaws, the M-Tronic, they've got electronics in them and other things. And I've got an MS 311, it says that it's to a certain degree, it self-compensates or self-tunes itself. So there's a lot of saws out there that you can't really tune, or you're very limited in tuning. So anyway, we'll go over that. But before we go over that, you have to understand that if your saw is not idling properly or it's not revving up, it's just not performing. There are 4 different other reasons that it could be. Could be your air filter, could be a spark plug, could be your coil, could be your carburetor. So we'll just go over some of them briefly, and if you believe that all those things are okay, then we'll sort of get to the stage of tuning. So first of all, the other one there's another one, your crankshaft seals are worn. Now, if your crankshaft seals are worn, there's a vacuum test for that. But a few of the problems related to crankshaft seals that are worn is oil leaks. You'll find out that you'll see oil coming down the side a bit there where the crankshaft is. You'll also find out that it fails to idle sometimes. You can't get an idle. It's stalling on acceleration, and sometimes you can't even reach maximum RPM. That's when the seals are really worn. So there are a few things there that can throw you out. Now, the other thing is coils. Now, coils are very interesting because they're integrated with electronics these days. And you've got your primary and your secondary. But the secondary, which is the thin wire, that's the one that causes all the trouble because the wire's so thin, it's got lacquer on them. And in some of my other videos, you would have heard me say that I keep all my chainsaws razor sharp because nothing worse than using a dull saw. It puts wear and tear on everything. It overheats the motor. If you overheat the motor, you're going to overheat the coil, and eventually the lacquer will break down, and eventually you can short the coil, or the coil doesn't work properly. Instead of producing 100,000 volts, it might only produce a lot less. Now, you can do the resistance test on a coil, which should be between 2.2 and 3K. So what you need to do is pull the coil out and check it. There's also a little air gap there. That's where you'll see the laminated plates that come in close contact with the magneto. There should be an air gap of about 1/4 thou there. So also with the coil, you'll hear people turn around and say, oh, no worries, just pull the spark plug out and see if you've got a spark. You can get a spark in normal atmosphere, but the moment that it's under compression, it can take the path of least resistance and short out and not spark at all. And that's what can happen a lot of times when you hear people say that, oh, I've got a spark. So if you do the resistance test and the resistance shows up okay, the only other possibility sometimes that can happen is that you might find out the electronic part of it, if the resistance in that integrated circuit, maybe it's playing up a little bit. So yeah, anyway, we don't want to get too involved in that. The next one is your air filter. Well, that's pretty straightforward. You want to make sure that it's clean and not full of dust, because it's all accumulated of dust and dirt. It's not going to breathe very good. So that's pretty straightforward as well. The next is a carburetor. Now, the carburetor is very interesting on a chainsaw because it's not gravity fed, and which is a bit of a shame. It would have been better if the gas tank was up higher and it could be gravity fed. So how they feed the fuel into the carburetor is using a diaphragm, and they use the positive and negative pressure from the piston, and there's a little hole where the carburetor bolts on. So as the piston goes up and down, you've got negative and backward, negative and positive pressure. And this goes into a little chamber at the bottom where the diaphragm is, and that causes a diaphragm to pulse up and down. The pulsing up and down draws fuel in like a pump. As that deteriorates and gets older, it doesn't pump as good. The other thing is the needle and seat. The needle and seat can wear and it can flood. So as it wears out, it can tend to flood. So that can be a problem too. The only other thing that can happen, and I've seen it before, I've seen dust in the bottom of the diaphragm, because normally there's a little hose there that goes back to the air filter, and I've seen dust collect in there. So that's the other thing. Dirt and very fine particles of dirt can get in your carburetor and block it. And sometimes you need carburetor cleaner and you need to blow it out, get a new a kit. We'll have a new diaphragm and a new needle and seat, and you can do that. So before you tune up your chainsaw, all as I'm saying to you is that those problems that I've just discussed could also be linked to the existing problem. So we're excluding all those problems and saying that your chainsaw is just not working as good as it should be. It just needs a little bit of a tune. So on the older saw, you've got three adjustments. You've got your LA for your idle, and you've got your high adjustment screw and your low adjustment screw. These are unlimited in the old saw, meaning that you can wind them out till they come out. On the newer saws, they've got a little black cap in there, and you can only limit, say, maximum half a turn. Okay, so you want to tune this saw up. First of all, make sure that you record, get a torch, look into the little hole, and make sure that you know what position that they're at, whether they're at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whatever. So write that down for the low and write it down for the high, so you know that if all else goes wrong, you can always put it back to the way that it was. So you really should be doing that so that in case you muck it all up. Okay, so let's say that you've done that. The next thing that you do, that you close the low until it stops and you open it up a half a turn. You do that to the low and the high. Close them both and open them back a half a turn. That is your starting point. Now, when you close the low and the high, it's going to make the saw run leaner. So when you go anti-clockwise, it'll make it run richer. So by closing the low and the high till it stops, till you run out of adjustment, and open it back up a half a turn, that is a great starting point. That is a recommendation to a lot of saws. Open half a turn. Then hopefully your saw's been warmed up prior to that. And let's say that your saw's warm up and you restart your saw. Give it a couple of blips and see how it goes. Now on the low setting, what you're looking at is that it should accelerate at least to half RPM. So yeah, if a saw goes to 12,000 RPM, it should accelerate to 6,000 RPM before it starts going into the high range. If it still feels that it's going there, but you just feel, it just doesn't feel right. I feel it's not smooth enough. There's a slight hesitation. Close it a little bit more. You should be between half and a quarter open on that setting. And the same for the high. The high, you start off with half open, and you should be able to slowly close it a little bit. Not much, only talking no more than probably a quarter of a turn. So in other words, a good chainsaw in good condition, it's old as what this is, it's already got a new coil on it, it's got a new carburetor on it. I've tuned this. It's roughly around the half, a little bit less than half a turn on each low and the high. It runs perfect. So that is how I tune this saw up. There is another little technique that you can do. If the saw is tuned really good, and I found out that this actually works is that, let's just say we've got this saw running, right? So this saw's running and it's at an idle. All as you do is, as fast as you can, drop the saw down like that, as fast, as sharply as you can, and the idle should remain the same. Or the opposite, flip it up like that as fast as you can, and the idle should remain the same. If it goes to stall, then you know that your tuning on your low needs to be refined a bit more. That's just something that someone showed me once before. Or you've got another problem with your carburetor. You see, what I'm saying to you, that I'm saying that if you do this tuning, that's provided that everything's working properly. So it can be more and more complicated if that's not the case. So I'm just making the assumption that your chainsaw and carburetor and coil and air filter, everything's in good working condition. If you do what I've just explained to you, your saw should run good, because you're only tweaking it. You should be tweaking it anywhere from half opened on the screw, on the low and the high, to quarter open. Now, you have these little screws. This is an MS-180, and this is the better version of the MS-170. It's much more expensive, so it has better features on it. It also comes with, a little bit hard to see because it's black, you've got your idle down the bottom here. It's called LA, and you've got your high and your low up the top. It's got little black limiter caps in there, meaning that you can't adjust it out like you can on the older saws. You're limited in its movement. So again, if you're going to adjust this saw, you've got to make sure same rule would apply, that you assume that the coil, the carby, the air filter, the crankcase seals, they're all in good condition. But you just feel that the saw needs a bit of a tune, or you want to learn how to tune it. You do exactly the same thing. So here's an example. This saw is less than 2 years old. So let's just say I want to try and tune it up better. Record where it is. Okay, so record the low and the high setting. If it's idling okay, you don't need to touch it. You only need to touch the idle if it's going too high or too low. That's the only time you need to adjust the idle. I always have the idle so that the chain is not moving or barely moves. Yeah, it might just sort of creep along. On the older saws, it was probably the MS380. It tends to creep along a little bit, so you don't have the idle too low. If the idle is set correctly and the saw's all tuned properly, it can sit on the ground and idle for days on end. But if it's not tuned properly, you can find out, you can sit the saw down, and after a minute, if it just goes conk, then yeah, it really needs something's not right. And then you've got to do an investigation. Why is the saw stalling or conking at an idle? It should be okay. So the same rule would apply with this here, that you would record, you'd get a light and you'd look at the settings, a little slit that's in the screw, write down whether it's at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whatever position it is in. Proceed to do the low first and rev it up, give it a blip. And if it sounds like it's not smooth, slowly close it until it sounds smoother. If you run out of adjustment, could be something else wrong. You don't have a lot of movement in those. As I said, they're restricted because of legislation that makes sure that it's nice and clean for the environment. It's not pollutant. You don't want it too rich. They try and have the saws on the lean side. It's the same as cars and everything else. These days, everywhere's going for the leaner setting rather than the rich setting. Got to be careful if you don't go too lean, because the motor will run hotter. Anyway, look, I hope that helps for people out there. I'm only saying, I'll just recap. If you want to tune your saw up and you're using the high and the low setting, before you do that, you have to be reasonably sure that you don't have any other problems with your saw, especially if you've got a crankcase seal leaks. They'll generally leak a bit of oil, and you might find out they don't idle properly. You can't reach high RPM. You won't have a vacuum gauge to test it, most likely, unless you're a mechanic or something like that there, and you may need to take it to a dealer to get them. You tell them, look, I want my saw checked over, and may even pay for you to get a service and mention those things. Can you check me saw out and give me a report back on it? Anyway, look, give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.